Full meeting of council of Monday, June 18th, 2012 at 7 p.m. to order. First item of business on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda. Just, Mr. Howie, are there any additions to the agenda?
No, there aren't, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. So the recommendation is that the agenda for the special committee of the whole meeting of June 18th, 2012 be adopted as circulated. Moved by Councillor Kinney, seconded by Councillor Thorkelson. Any discussion? Okay, question has been called. All those in favor? Thank you. That motion passes. Now we'll move on to petitions and delegations. And the first item under petitions and delegations is the staff and consultant presentations on the public safety building. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Roden.
Thank you, Your Worship. Tonight we have Zeno Crackett, who is going to talk about zoning and bylaws and how that's going to fit in with the location of wherever we happen to build a building, if we do decide to build one. Inspector Kilberry is here tonight to discuss possible building sites from the RCMP vantage point, as is Fire Chief Dave McKenzie, Public Works General Manager and of Engineering and Public Works. Bill Horn is here tonight, and he will be able to talk briefly about the sites and some of the advantages and disadvantages of the sites from the perspective of site preparation and utility services. And Whitmer Bill, who is our consulting architect, is here tonight to lead the, after Mr. Crackett is finished, to lead us through a short PowerPoint which basically lists the sites that we have looked at, how a possible building could be sited on the site if it's feasible, and then Inspector Kilberry, Fire Chief McKenzie, and Mr. Horn will also add commentary to the discussion at that time. And of course, the public's invited to make telephone inquiries. Your questions will be answered, and they can also reach me by email at dan.roden@princerupert.ca. So, Mr. Crackett.
Essentially, just kind of guide you through public safety, institutional facilities in general, within community planning and land use regulation context. And of course, to that end, that means quality of life official community plan, zoning bylaw, and development permit areas. Starting with quality of life official community plan, one of the overarching principles within others that are listed can be found on page 3. And thank you, Anson. Public safety and freedom from crime is one of the sort of overarching principles that the community has identified in their deliberation about what is important within the context of community planning within City of Prince Rupert. A little bit more closer to land use policies, the quality of life official community plan is predicated on serving as a guide, and I think some of the key words that are in this introductory statement to land use policy is that we have made a lot of effort to move and avoid being overly prescriptive and restrictive, and seeking flexibility is enhanced in responsiveness to innovation, and creativity is stressed. And that kind of works from both parts, the people who are proposing development and us who are keeping the regulations. Public, just in case there are any questions, please interrupt me. Public safety institutional development is a specific sort of entity And based on these principles, public safety institutional development is suitable in any location, subject to 2 more tests. And of course, with the added emphasis continuously on creativeness, innovation, which is currently really immersed in community consultation, one couldn't really ask more than for that, at least if you're a planner. Test number 1 is zoning bylaw. Public institutional buildings are defined in city zoning bylaw and permitted in public facilities P1 zone. They include fire hall and RCMP, and by the way, both of which are located in core commercial C1 zone, which speaks to the city's move towards what is referred to as performance-based flexible zoning. Arguably, if any new location is located in P1 zone, an amendment to zoning map will be required. Something that we can leave for the future, but it's not showstopper.
Could I ask a question about that?
Sure.
So if there is a need to change zoning, how difficult would that be? What would it require?
Just kind of going back to this, rather than flipping back on the slides, this entire conversation is immersed in a community consultation, and within a context of such, the site will be located to the best benefit of the community, and it's going to be more of an administrative matter rather than a regulatory matter. If we decide that changes are necessary, they will definitely go to the public hearing process, which I would suggest by that time would be almost redundant due to the amount of the consultations that has taken place already.
Thank you.
Development permit areas. We have 2 development permit areas that would affect this project. I imagine 3 industrial areas also development permit area, but I would probably suggest that such would not be the case. If the project is located within Cow Bay or downtown development permit area, then development permit area design guidelines would apply. And considering that fire hall and RCMP together or on a separate sites will be civic buildings, it is safe to assume that form and shape guidelines will be promoted in design and during the design process. In conclusion, land use policies and regulations provide a range of flexibilities, and locating suitable sites is more contingent on physical consideration.
Thank you. Does anyone from council have any questions or comments? Just looking to staff for direction here, would we be better to have questions from the public as each presentation is done, or wait for the end?
I think we can probably handle it, Your Worship, as people raise their hand, we can just carry on and answer the questions. That way we don't lose the minute.
Okay, is there anyone that's in the audience that has a question about the presentation? All right, seeing none, we'll move on. So next up would be who?
Whitmer Bill and the Inspector Bob Kilberry, Fire Chief Dave McKenzie, and Public Works Manager Bill Horn.
Thank you. Yeah, sure. Just tell me. Sorry. Not used to be on this chair. I know. I think we can solve them. I don't want to. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you and good evening. Pleasure to be here once again. So, review of potential sites. I've been given a number of sites to look at. There were many sites, well, a few more sites identified actually in the beginning, and some of those had been sort of pre-evaluated by the RCMP and found as not suitable. So my presentation is largely on the sites that were already pre-screened by the RCMP. So of course there are many factors to consider in site selection. And one of them is planning. We've just heard from the planner. Issues like context, land use, and form and character. And secondly, operational. And by operational, I'm referring to things like response time, which is a very important consideration for the fire department, especially because the emergency vehicles have to get to the scene of the emergency as quickly as possible, of course. Security of the site, and this is more an RCMP issue. What the RCMP securities people are looking at is things like, if the site is located at the bottom of a hill, for instance, and there are buildings above it, then there's an overlook problem, for example, and and people can look into the yard and see how many vehicles are out on the road or parked in the yard, and who's coming and going when the shift changes, and et cetera, et cetera. So those things are kind of an issue for them. Physical constraints, things like soils conditions. What is the underlying ground condition on the site? Is it bedrock, or is it soft material that would require expensive piling? The topography of the site, of course, is important, and of course the size of the site itself. To make sure that the use can be accommodated. Municipal services. What are the existing? Is the site serviced or not? What existing services are available or maybe running through the site that have to be considered, and what services would be required for the development? And availability is another consideration. Is the land owned by the city, or is it privately owned and would have to be purchased? And lastly, economic consideration. Of course, all of these relate to economic considerations. It's what is the cost to purchase the site, and what is the cost to develop the site? Sometimes a very cheap site can be the most expensive site in the long run because of the cost to prepare it for development. And lastly, what is the highest and best use? If there's a site that's suitable for commercial purposes, maybe it should be left for commercial purposes and not taken out of the tax base. So these are some of the things that we looked at when we evaluated the sites. So I will start with the first site, which is at McBride and 5th and 6th Avenues, and it's right across the street from the existing RCMP building. It's also the site of the Moose Park, but it also encompasses some of the sites just to just off 5th Avenue that I understand are currently for sale. So, and remembering that we were looking at site selection in the context of a joint use public safety building for both RCMP and fire department. A closer up view. And so we started looking at side yard setbacks. These are zoning regulations. So there's I think it was a 10-foot or a 3-meter setback from neighboring properties. Some of the existing municipal services running through the site, and Bill, are those storm sites, storm lines, or?
The lines shown through there are actually the storm system that ran through there. It's actually an old creek line that ran through that park area before the site was developed into what it is now.
Okay, thank you. And then we started looking at how the site could accommodate the program that we've developed in discussion with the RCMP and the fire department. And first looking at just the fire hall, then RCMP alone, and then what would it look like if we were to try to combine it as a joint use building. So this would be the fire hall scenario. Drive-through apparatus space, front apron fronting onto McBride Street, some public and staff parking, and at the rear of the site, some mostly maneuvering space, but also suitable for training purposes. So the idea is that the fire trucks would leave the hall and exit out onto McBride Street, and then return on 6th Avenue, enter the rear yard, and then back into the apparatus space. Another possible scenario would be to allow the fire trucks to exit onto 6th Avenue and then return back, either from McBride or 5th Avenue. RCMP, and all of this is assuming that there's a 2-story building configuration. So this would be the main floor of the RCMP building with a second floor stacked on top. Some secure parking at the rear and some public parking, and so the site is plenty big enough for either the RCMP or the fire department alone, with room to spare. So then we start looking at what would it take to accommodate both emergency services departments on the site, and we felt that this configuration wouldn't be quite sufficient to accommodate both. And so, somebody from city staff suggested that maybe we can add a little bit more by purchasing some adjacent lots. And this is all, of course, completely hypothetical. And so this is what it would look like as a joint use building. Again, assuming that much of the program is stacked. In fact, in this case, there would also be a basement. Fairly self-explanatory. There's, the fire hall and the RCMP, they're sort of joined at the hip, with some potential overlap of uses. And as we've heard in previous sessions, the potential for joint use is somewhat limited, but things like shared fitness room or multi-purpose room, common lobby, and of course the building mechanical services could be shared, so there could be some economies achieved. But it would require a fairly large piece of land, such as this one. So there would be some site acquisition costs. Another scenario that was discussed is to, rather than purchasing the commercial properties that are fronting onto 5th Avenue, what if we took the park, the tennis courts, and then even closed off a portion of 6th Avenue, again with the idea of doing a joint use building. And so this is a possible footprint to demonstrate that idea. Nice thing about this site, of course, or both of these sites, is that they're very flat. So in terms of site development cost, it's one of the better ones in town. Another scenario was to look at only the tennis court site, but say, okay, what if the Masonic Hall was available, if it was to be purchased, and then the portion of land that's dedicated to Bowser Street, which has never been constructed, could also be incorporated into that into the site, and this is what that would look like. Again, there would be some land acquisition costs involved in this, but yeah, I guess the drawback here is that the site is kind of shallow, so we can see on the fire department side it would be a little bit difficult to do drive-through. You'd almost have to provide access off the, if I can use the mouse here, off this little road. What is that road? Seventh, yeah. Okay, 7th. So if there was an access to the site provided off 7th Avenue, then you could still have the drive-through. But there's really no opportunity for sort of maneuvering or training space. And then the other scenario here is to look at separate buildings, individual buildings on separate sites, and using only the park site and only the tennis park site without having to purchase any additional land. And as this diagram indicates or demonstrates, that would work just fine from a planning perspective. Both sites are quite adequate to accommodate the two departments individually. But of course, you lose the opportunity for any shared use. And I guess this is just another permutation of the earlier one, where we take over the Masonic Hall site and the Bowser Street land, and essentially have two separate buildings on that land configuration. And by spreading the buildings apart, that allows us to have a little bit of maneuvering space for the fire department. So we wouldn't need to provide the access off 7th Avenue. The vehicles would exit out onto McBride Street and then enter back into the yard on 6th Avenue. It looks like it could work in theory, but in my opinion, it's a little bit tight. The other site that I was given to look at is located behind the Highlander, or next to the Highlander Hotel, on 8th Avenue and between 1st and 2nd Avenue, 8th Street between 1st and 2nd Avenue. Now, this site has some significant challenges. As you're all aware, there's a very deep hole, essentially, with about a 30-foot drop on the corner at the intersection of 8th Street and 2nd Avenue, which, on the one hand, it could, you could say, well, this could be underground parking, could be basement, etc., and that does have some potential. However, there is also a 48-inch diameter concrete sewer pipe running right through the middle of that site, as is indicated with this red line, and as well as some secondary, smaller storm drain lines that tie into that major line. Bill, do you want to speak to that a little more?
Yeah, this site has a number of issues with it. The site itself is quite deep to the existing ground site in there, but it's also about another 4 to 5 meters below that, and where the sewer line goes through. So it's a very deep site to start with. You've got the sewer line that runs through there, which is it's a 48-inch pipe. It goes right down to the waterfront. It's one of the main trunk sewers that service the east side of the west side of 3rd Avenue, up to basically Borden Street. There's hydro lines underneath there. There's gas lines that run through that back alley. The site's got some very difficult excavation potential in that area. For servicing, it also has a water line through there too as well. So every utility that we have basically goes in that back lane behind the Highliner right towards the commercial hotel there. And the big one going across is the hardest one to relocate. It's not. It's got to be very deep. So if we try to put it under the roadway, we'll be down the same depth, but under a road base.
Okay. Thanks, Bill. I guess I should have given you the opportunity to make some comment on the other site. Did you have some further comment on either the Moose Park or the tennis court site?
These two sites here are. Yeah, these sites here, they're probably one of the better ones of the bunch because the rock contours under the tennis court are quite shallow. It's a fairly good buildable site. The Moose lot has got it's got storm drainage running through it. It's an old creek bed. Portions of the property have got about 2 to 3 meters of muskeg and rock fill on it from the highway. The houses that are on the far corner of the Green Clinic, they're all on piles in that section, so it could be 12 feet deep to the base of the rock. The advantages of that property, though, that they do have the main transmission lines for telephone, which is the fiber optic cable. They have major hydro that runs down McBride Street. The servicing on 6th Avenue East is quite large. It's all 12-inch water line. And the utility corridors in that area are for sanitary sewer storm are easy to hook into.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, here's back to the 8th and 2nd Avenue site. So here's the yellow line indicates the overhead power line that's running through that back lane. But nonetheless, we did a bit of a planning study for that site as well, just to see what a joint use building could look like. We fairly quickly came to the conclusion that it would have to be it would have to have a basement to accommodate some of the underground or some of the parking requirement, as well as some, maybe some of the mechanical functions. Possibly the RCMP cell block could be underground, and then a 2-story building stacked on top of that. So that's one scenario. So in this case, the fire trucks would exit out onto 2nd Avenue and then return back from 1st Avenue into the drive-through bays. There's another. So this diagram is indicating sort of a schematic section through the site on the right-hand side of the screen. So the upper these block diagrams are just essentially an indication of how the program would be distributed. RCMP cell block, vehicle bays, operational support at the basement level, mechanical, electrical shared for the building. Fire hall, staff parking could also be located at that level. And then at the main level, RCMP admin offices, general duty workstations, and so forth. A shared lobby, fire department operational supports, and of course the apparatus bays. And then on the 2nd floor, stacked fire hall admin offices, living quarters, shared fitness room, multi-purpose facilities, and then other RCMP office functions. Now, RCMP Securities really don't like this approach. They're very opposed to having underground parking. For security reasons, it's too easy for somebody to park a vehicle with a car bomb in it. So for that reason, that's probably the least favorite of the options for for the security folks at the RCMP. And Inspector Kilbury, do you want to make some comment on that?
Sure, I can comment on that. That certainly is not only something as nefarious as a car bomb. All it would take would be a stalled vehicle parked across there, a vehicle that's immobilized somehow that would prevent vehicles from exiting from there that had to respond to an emergency. So from a security perspective and a public safety perspective, it's certainly not a preferred option for us.
I just had a question on that. I know that all of these are hypothetical. Just going with that idea, because we've been told that the parking is an issue. In all of these planning stages, there might be one that's coming up that does consider this, was closing 8th Street off and using it as possible parking ever considered in any of the options?
That wasn't an option that was given to me.
Okay, thank you.
So aside from some of the security considerations, of course, as we just saw earlier, some of the existing services running through that site would make this one of the more expensive options to build. So, any sort of possible gains from combining the two functions and sort of having overlapping uses and efficiencies that could be gained from that would be far outweighed by development costs for this site. And this was actually costed out by our quantity surveyor, and he basically proved that to be the case. So then there were some additional sites, or a couple of additional sites. One of them being at the Five Corners intersection, Park Avenue and Bigger Place. And again, it's purely hypothetical. I'm not even sure if it's for sale or not, but nonetheless, it was given to us to look at. Site area is 6,036 square meters, and that makes it one of the larger sites of all the other site options that we looked at. And as the diagram indicates, the footprint of both departments can easily be accommodated with ample space for training, maneuvering in the back, staff parking, and or secure. Now, I don't see any RCMP secure parking here, but there's enough sort of leftover space I can see right now that I'm quite confident we can accommodate the secure parking as well. So, are there any comments about servicing or underlying conditions, or
the underlying conditions in this site are kind of unknown at the moment. We don't really have a lot of information on this property. I couldn't tell you I'm not familiar with the ground conditions of that. We do have a large water supply there. Utilities are all available to that site. We've got fiber optic, I believe, on that street as well. So communications, hydro, telephone, gas, water, sewer, it's all available on that street. And I believe it is a privately owned property. So.
From the RCMP perspective on that property, there are some residences off of Bigger Place. There would have to be a road that would have to be constructed to allow access to those properties if they were to remain. So we're not in the same situation we are now, where we have residents traveling through the parking lot to get to their homes.
Then one last site is the one down at McBride and 2nd Avenue, behind, incorporating was I think the former Dairy Queen, was it? Yeah. Sort of an L-shaped site. Again, it would be in theory big enough to accommodate both departments. There are some issues. It's again, this is a pit right now that would have to be filled or constructed as basement and whatnot. Again, there's a public lane that comes through here with presumably services. Bill can speak to that in a bit. So in theory, yes, it's big enough to accommodate both departments in terms of location, response time. Actually, all of the sites that we were looking at in terms of response time are fairly decent and being located in the inner city. So, Bill, if you have any comments on serviceability.
This site is, as you say, it's a very deep site. The basement underneath the Dairy Queen building goes down at least 2 stories below the ground. There's actually a fairly large sewer line that kind of diagonally goes across the property from the corner of 2nd and 1st to McBride and 3rd Avenue West. It could be relocated. It's a very old line. Servicing on the property, it's got all available servicings to that street, to that property. But it'll, as Abel said, it's probably going to cost a fair amount to fill it up to get it to grade.
Councillor Kinney.
Thank you, Your Worship. Directed to you, Fire Chief Dave, how would you feel about trucks coming out there on McBride and 2nd?
This is probably one of the worst properties for us in the sense that moving apparatus, just getting off of 3rd Avenue or 2nd Avenue with our apparatus is going to, you see how highly congested it is now without even the big trucks there, so it could be a hindrance to us big time.
Yeah, that corner of 2nd and McBride is a busy corner, and if you had to make a turn to get onto 2nd Avenue going westbound, it might be difficult with traffic coming around off McBride.
Any other questions from councillors at this time? Okay, thank you.
And I believe this was the last site. Yes. I'm just going to flip back to this one. The site directly across the street from 3rd Avenue was also one of the ones that was identified early on, but it was dismissed by RCMP security. There's, as you know, there's a hill directly below this piece of land, which gives people the opportunity to overlook the site. So that's kind of a negative. But also, and more importantly, it was too narrow of a strip. It really wasn't very suitable for the purpose. And so that is the extent of the sites that we've looked at to date.
Okay. So are there any questions from council regarding the presentation at this time? Councillor Carlick-Pearson.
Yeah, my question is to the McBride and the Moose Top Park area that seems so ideal with, because of the location and whatnot. But my concern is that displacement of services that we're going to have to displace the park and possibly the tennis courts and the basketball courts. And it is a highly used area by our community. And we are talking about the quality of life for our members. And I know that it's not your intention to displace any groups, but we have to figure out if that is an area, and then maybe not only to our presenters, but also to council to really consider, what are we going to do? How are we going to replace that park? Where are we going to put that basketball court and the tennis courts that are used, not only on sunny days, but pretty well all year? And like the other projects that are going into Prince Rupert now, where are they going to put the access to the water? We can't go to Ridley Island now. What do we do? We're running out of places in Prince Rupert, and we really need to consider that. And so, I'm all for it, but for the ideal property, if there is a safety services building, but we need to consider our children and families as well.
Your Worship?
Yes, Mr. Howie.
If it turns out that either or both of those sites are the best sites for the public safety buildings, our final report, which Mr. Roden will be preparing in the fall, would include options for relocation of both. Once just thinking out loud here, but once the RCMP moves, then that property becomes available, and that might be the replacement spot for the Moose Tot lot, because it is very central, and it's good to have it in that central location. And we'll look for other options for the tennis courts as well. But that'll all be in the final report, should these two sites be preferred.
Councillor Carlick-Pearson.
That's good to hear, but I think we really need to, as the city, we really need to let the community know that, and not only make it a promissory note that we are going to eventually replace the park, but it's hand in hand. We have to be able to produce a property for what we're taking away, and it is an ideal property, right? So thank you.
Any other questions from council? Councillor Kinney.
Thank you, Your Worship. I agree with Judy Carlick-Pearson because the group that has worked on this park for many, many years and devoted their lodge to it, I mean, we owe them too. And we've really got to take into big consideration.
Any other questions or comments from council? Councillor Thorkelson.
This has mostly been looking at city-owned property with a few other places downtown. I was wondering if what the problem with further out the highway is the development costs. If looking at the BC Hydro site where we were looking at before, is it because it's too close to the mountain? I noticed a number of site specifications that we had here. One of them wasn't not too close to the mountain. So I was just wondering if it was what you're looking at for putting it out the highway.
Mr. Roden?
I'll start, and I expect Inspector Kilberry will finish it off here. That was a site that came up early in the discussions because it is a nice piece of property out there. The RCMP had some concerns about being that far out of town. The closer site, which is just behind the Lester Center, is city-owned. Unfortunately, it's a bit of a quagmire, and road access into that site and building the site preparation would be difficult. And maybe Mr. Horn might have something to say to that too.
I'll speak to that site for the RCMP's perspective. It's, in my opinion, it's too far out of town. We have a large number of foot traffic to our office that has to be accessible to the public. Public transit out in that neck of the woods would be poor. We release prisoners from our custody at early hours of the morning. On a dark winter night, walking out from the BC Hydro site would be disastrous for all concerned. So from our perspective, it's not really as accessible to the public, to the people in the community, as we'd like it to be. And that's why the preferred site would be somewhere similar to where we are located now, or in the downtown core.
Mr. Horn?
The site behind the Performing Arts Center, I'll deal with that one. Talk about that one first. There's a fairly large ravine and a fairly large swamp behind the Performing Arts Center if you get back behind the parking lot. The site where the old trailer park is not large enough to accommodate the facility. It's kind of narrow and short and doesn't facilitate it. Road access in the area is not very good. The servicing to the property is very poor. We don't have a very large sewer system or water supply to that property. And that is similar with the BC Hydro site. The BC Hydro site's not really serviced for a large capacity type building of this sort, and that is in a swamp. It's very deep. Site conditions on that property are very poor. there's been a lot of development done by the person interested in developing on another structure in there, and I found out the same issues that we found out prior to that. So it's not the best site.
Okay. Councillor Garon and then Councillor Carlick-Pearson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think this is more of a question towards Whitmar. According to your quantity surveyor, which lot does he prefer for just the RCM? I'm just looking at just the RCMP building at this point in time.
Sorry, the quantity surveyor only looked at 2 sites, one being the Moose Park site and then the one at 8th Avenue and 2nd, because those are the 2 sites that had been narrowed down in the first instance. And so we did a more extensive study, including the costs. And so between those 2, the Moose site or the park site would be preferable from a cost perspective, yeah.
Will he be looking at other sites as well? Or I guess that depends on what we narrow down to. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Councillor Carlick-Pearson.
What about the old schools? Have we looked at that? Do we have...
Mr. Howie?
One of the difficulties is they're at ends of the community, and part of the exercise here was try to find some property where particularly fire could get to the ends of the community from a central location. The other difficulty may be acquiring those facilities. They're still tied up with the provincial government, which doesn't allow schools to sell properties. The province is looking at that, and by the time a decision is made around the final disposition of this issue, they may very well be available. But the key thing, I think, is the fact that they're mostly located in either end of town.
Councillor Carlick-Pearson?
Plus, they're pretty well surrounded by residential homes too. That's another concern. But what about the we were talking about the Islander Hall that's located beside the RCMP detachment now. Has that been a question?
Mr. Howie or Mr. Roden?
You're thinking of buying the Islander Hall and tearing down the RCMP station and building a new property there. That would be feasible, but where would we put the RCMP station in the meantime? There's like if we need to put the RCMP station somewhere before the current RCMP station is dismantled. So the Islander Hall itself and the small parking lot there simply wouldn't be large enough to cover up the actual space that we need. I think that the actual space of that is approximately the same amount of space as the existing parking lot and RCMP detachment footprint.
Councillor Kinney.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, Your Worship, to Mr. Howie or Mr. Roden, have we looked and talked to Mr. Maragna at all about the 5 corners?
No, we haven't. We haven't talked to any of the private property owners.
Any further questions from council? I have a couple. It's good to hear why some of the sites were considered and all of the different things about services, because I think that's important for people to know why certain sites are being considered more than others. I'm going to be honest and say there's some things that I'm not as convinced would be deal breakers unless somebody showed me a contractual thing about it. But for example, the BC Hydro site, the fact of the site development costs would be more of what I would be weighing as opposed to the distance, although I do understand the concern. And I guess for me it's because our town's pretty small and I could see other options. For example, I understand our bus service might not be able to do there, but a cab would only cost $5. I'm thinking we could probably figure some stuff out. But I do understand those things. My questions actually kind of center, and I know that it's because of what was asked. A lot of the sites that have been looked at, some of them have been considered for single use buildings, and then some have only really been considered in terms of like a dual purpose building. And I'm wondering, and I realize that we might not have even looked at this, and there may be reasons financially why we haven't, but for example, with the option by the Highliner, was it ever looked at as just a single use, and would that, if it was only a single use, the sewer, I understand that the sewer line running underneath there is like one of the biggest concerns, although there's other things there. If it was a single use building, like let's say for the RCMP, just, for example, would it be able to, with the site dimensions needed, would it be possible to put it on that site and then, again, hypothetically speaking, as I mentioned this earlier, perhaps closing off a section of street and providing secured parking somewhere there? I don't know if that is something, not asking for like development plans, but just feasibility. Is that something that would work? And I'd be interested to hear from Mr. Abel as well as Mr. Horn, and also perspectives from Mr. Kilberry.
We didn't actually look at that because the mandate in the beginning was to look at joint use buildings. Without having gone through the exercise of planning the site, but I think it's a possibility. It might be worth looking at, just from the perspective of the size, the area of the site that's available, say to the I don't know which direction. Is it south? West side? Okay, so on the west side of the site, it seems like it might be feasible. However, I think that the site development costs, that's really the underlying problem here, or maybe the overriding problem, because that's also the deepest part of the site, right? Bill, do you have any other comments?
I think that the site, if it was divided into quarters, so to speak, where you took the west side, the northwest side of the site, made it one, and the southeast side of that site, it made it another property, which might take up a part of the parking lot of the Highliner. You might get away with something in there, but you still got to look at it. We haven't even looked at it.
Yeah, no, I understand, and I realize I'm throwing out hypotheticals, but I'm trying to cover all the bases and try to, in some ways, I guess at what kinds of questions people might be asking as to why we're considering or not, and so that we're looking at all of the different options. I also had a question, and this relates to Councillor Carlick-Pearson's question regarding that piece of property in behind the RCMP. And I understand what Mr. Roden was saying about it would be very difficult to have to be building, and then you have to find another place for the RCMP. So my question would be, because right now the RCMP is located on that one piece, if we started on, and this is just, again, hypothetical, but we managed to acquire the property behind, could construction start while they're using the current RCMP building, and then enough of a building, I guess, and use be constructed, like the cells and the other things, and then temporarily, while the rest of the building, which would be potentially, I guess, more of the parking lot areas, because I would assume we'd be going in 2 stories, etc., that could be maybe a temporary thing where offices and stuff might have to be relocated for a certain period of time. Is that feasible?
I guess you'd have to look and see what the building looked like and what the footprint of the building would be. I'm not sure how large the actual property is, how much of the hill could be excavated from the area to, and what the building would look like, because you'd still be able to utilize the parking that's in the current building while something was under construction, I suppose. We are talking hypotheticals.
Right, yeah, no, I understand.
If we're going to talk that, it would seem to me that another solution might be to build the tennis courts elsewhere in the community so they're available for somebody, build the RCMP detachment on the tennis courts, move the top lot over to the existing RCMP site, and then build the fire hall. not disadvantaging anyone at any one time.
Yeah, no, and I totally, that actually brings me to my next question, which I was going to ask because, and I might have just missed because there was a lot of options, but I'm sort of feeling similarly to Councillor Kinney and Councillor Carlick-Pearson in terms of the Tot Park in particular, just because we have such a shortage of kids parks in the community. And I know that the things are being used. So I was interested to see the site that had the tennis courts, and then with the, I realize we haven't purchased anything, but was that ever considered for just one building, or has it only been considered for two?
No, we do have an option where it's used as just a single. You see, for instance, this one. Now, we're showing the RCMP on the park side and the fire hall on the other, but it could be flipped around as well.
And then, if we were to say at whatever point we decide to go ahead with wherever we're building, we were to build on top of the tennis courts, then those could be moved once the other site is done, or if we find another site.
Correct.
Okay. Councillor Garon.
Thank you, Your Worship. Question for, I think probably for Mr. Horn or Mr. Bell. Just from everything you've presented, possibly the tennis court area and or that from the ground that you know, that would be the cheapest to develop the site in order to build on? Is that sort of what you're sort of going for at this point in time?
Well, it would certainly be cheaper than the one down at 8th Street and 2nd Avenue.
I'd still be curious at finding out about the Five Corner site, but just from everything you guys have told us, I'm just sort of leaning more towards the tennis court area for the RCMP building. Sounds like that one. I'm looking for a site that's something that we don't need to put a whole lot of development in to bring it up to grade, and that's a suitable site for the RCMP as well. So I'm kind of leaning towards that at this point in time from the information I've gotten right now.
Does anyone else? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to add that another thing that should be considered is the site acquisition cost, or you own these two sites. Mm-hmm. Any other sites you have to purchase, and I think Mr. Roden is going to have another presentation on that. Or
So I simply circulated some criteria that has to be looked at when we do the final site evaluation.
Councillor Thorkelson.
Yeah, I just was interested in I think the Mr. Horn's opinion of which is the cheapest site to build on.
The cheapest site to build on, the less. I'm assuming you're saying that the less work required to excavate for foundation and put fill on top. The tennis courts are probably we've already done it.
Right.
So we already know what the ground conditions are underneath the tennis court. They've all been excavated to solid rock, and they've been backfilled with good granular material. So the whole tennis court, including the basketball court, was done back in 1997. So yeah, it's good solid property there.
Councillor Thorkelson?
I'm not. I'm just kind of. My husband tells me spatially challenged. How much bigger is that tennis court site? Because it always looks to me about the same size as the RCMP where it is right now. So is it a lot bigger? I mean, I understand that I'm just wondering how much larger is that tennis court site than the site where the RCMP is? It double the size?
Yeah, we're just talking here. I think that what we're talking about is the footprint's a little bit bigger because of the back lane is now going to be used up as part of the building, which is behind the RCMP, and it's wider. Okay.
We have a question from Mr. Gray in the back. Mr. Gray, if you wanted to come up and just use one of the mics, that would be great.
The tennis court is a fairly large piece of property. So if you're going to find another site in Prince Rupert to put a tennis court of the same size as what you've got there, what are we talking about taking the tennis court away for? Because you're going to have to develop a piece of property
for a new tennis court, and there isn't very many places that I can think of where you're going to get that size that's centrally located in Prince Rupert either. So you're kind of putting the cart before the horse, taking away something before you've got a replacement for it.
Okay.
With both the Todd Park and the other one was on the 2nd Avenue behind the Highliner.
Mm-hmm.
That piece of property where the Highliner uses for the rental cars, does that belong to the Highliner?
Mr. Roden is nodding his head, yes.
Okay, because you have the existing ex-RCMP building there already. As if you were to add on to that over to the existing sewer line, you're looking at a fairly large piece of property, but you would have to use the parking lot from the Highliner.
Mr. Howie or Mr. Roden, do either of you have for the? I saw Mr. Roden went with the tennis court replacement. Did one of you have a comment on that?
I was just going to say, Your Worship, that if indeed the RCMP building were to go where the tennis courts are, the piece of property that the tennis courts or that the RCMP is on now would be available for tennis courts and should be pretty close to the same size.
And just a question related to that. I'm assuming that when you're talking about tennis courts, the type of foundation and strength of ground needed isn't quite as strong as if you're building a 2-story building. Would that be correct, Mr. Bill?
Yeah, that would be safe to say. But I don't know to what standards the tennis courts were developed back then. I mean, it may be suitable, but there would have to be a soils investigation.
Right.
Yeah.
It's definitely a good point, though, one we have to consider. Mr. Thorkelson, Councillor Thorkelson.
Long day, eh?
Yeah, long day.
I suppose that we have a number of playing fields that aren't being used, and I don't know what kind of. I mean, I know they're awful squishy, but whether we could actually put a tennis court on one of the playing fields. I mean, we were considering putting a dog park on one of the playing fields. I would assume that putting a tennis court down by the Civic Center would be an acceptable place to put it. I just don't know what you would need if there's any land down between the tennis court and the squash courts, which would be available, but I imagine we can find something depending on what the land development costs. It concerns me that we can all find. I mean, we could tear down the Fisherman's Hall and put it there too, right? I mean, we can all think of our favorite place to put a building, mm-hmm. But the question is where is it going to be the best, and wherever we relocate something, where are we going to be able to relocate it? Like, I really wouldn't want to relocate the tennis courts, as we'd have to have that discussion where the RCMP building is, if we're going to really consider the Todd Park for the fire hall, because it leaves us no place to relocate the Todd Park other than at the Civic Center, and I think it's more important to have a Todd Park centrally located than I think the tennis court would be fine down by the Civic Center. Now, I guess my other question which is only something I thought because of the tennis discussion about moving the tennis courts. Has any consideration being given to take any of the ball fields and make them any of the Civic Center fields, particularly the one we were going to put into a dog park, into either the fire hall or RCMP? Mr.
Roden.
That's a really good question. I've actually got two questions. Somebody else has asked that also. The idea of taking the Doug Kerr Field and turning it into either a fire hall or an RCMP station wasn't considered. Frankly, it never occurred to us because it's seen as a major piece of recreational property, and I guess the feeling was it would be a shame to see it cut up. Mr. Horn's looking my way, and he may have a comment on the site conditions there in any case.
Mr. Horn.
The Civic Center parking lot and the area beside it there is a very, very deep muskeg pit. Parts of it used to be a garbage dump. I think part of Hayes Creek was diverted at one time to accommodate to where it is now, and that whole area was filled with garbage to make the facility as it is. I really don't think that it's one of the sites we want to consider. We just put the new lift station down there. It's a 7-meter deep lift station. We didn't have to blast any rock out whatsoever. So, got 24 feet of muskeg.
Okay. Councillor Garan.
Just back to Councillor Thorkelson's tennis court idea. There was a tennis court beside the high school at one time, and it was dismantled. And could that possibly be reconstituted into a tennis court again, if anybody's familiar with that?
Mr. Roden or Mr. Horn?
I'm not. Bill's laughing. Mr. Horn is laughing at me. I don't play tennis, but I'm sure that there's any number of possible things, and we're hearing very clearly that if the decision is made, and no decision has been made, and there's a fair amount of analysis that still has to be done on whether or not these sites are suitable, but part of that analysis will be, what will it cost if we have to move the tot lot part? What will it cost to move it? And does that cost now mean that some other parcel is economically preferable than moving the tot lot? Similarly with the tennis courts, if we move the tennis courts, that's going to be part of the Mr. Creckett would say there's the quality of life equation here where, we're trying to make sure that the recreation facilities stay intact, or if they have to be moved, that they get resurrected in an appropriate area. And then there's also the simple finances of it, is that at the end of the day, probably one or two sites will cost significantly less or have other financial advantages to them that the other sites don't have, and all of that will be in the final report. I do have one last question here.
Please go ahead.
It's from a Brian Robinson of 1025 9th Avenue East, and he's wondering whether or not the Daily News site was considered as either a single building site or a dual building site, and it was not.
Are there any other questions from councillors? Councillor Thorkelson.
The only reason that I was trying to look at moving something down to the Civic Center, moving the tennis court Civic Center, is because I am worried about purchase sites and purchasing sites. I'm also worried, of course, as we speculate publicly, the value of sites may just increase. What I was wondering, and this I suppose is for Mr. To whomever is best to answer this question, but if we decided that we wanted to build a building or both buildings, would it be possible to, before we made a determination on whether to use one of our own sites or not, would it be possible to put out a almost like a I never know what they're called, but like a general call to the community to see if some people had property that they were willing to sell us, and what site and what the price would be for those size footprints, so that we would know what property was available. There's no use, talking about the Longshoremen's Hall if we don't know the Longshoremen want to sell their hall, right? And same thing as whether whether the old Islander Hall is for sale or whether the Masonic Hall is for sale, right? And so there's no use speculating. Would it be possible to do that, like put out a request for proposal kind of thing where people in the community or request of interest where people would be able to say that, so then you'd know if Five Corners was even for sale, and what the person would think that property was going to be worth in some kind of ballpark figure. I'm just wondering if that's a possibility.
Mr. Howie or Mr. Roden?
I think what I would prefer to do, thinking off the top of my head, is that as we narrow down to certain sites and we're comfortable that that site would be a good site, is then go to the property owner and say, okay, we are interested in your site. how much do you want for it, and then factor that purchase price into the actual cost of the site prep and site acquisition. I think that there's, and Mr. Horn may be able to elaborate on this, but there's a lot of potential sites out there, but there isn't really that many good sites out there. For example, we looked at the Dairy Queen site, that L-shaped one, and with and that site is for sale. But the L shape, the utilities in it, the size of the pit, or the hole that would probably have to be filled, doesn't render it as a very good site, and you don't need to spend a lot of time on it to be able to say, well, okay, we've sort of looked at that site, but we don't want to spend a lot more time evaluating that site because already we've identified enough costs for that site to not to make it a reasonable consideration.
Councillor Thorkson, then Councillor Carlick-Pearson.
Maybe you call it an expression of interest. I don't know what you call it, but it seemed to me that if you were able to, if we asked that, then there may be some sites that come up, and there may be that we haven't thought of looking for. That's all. And there may, and if they're no good, I'm sure Mr. Horn will tell us where all of the sewer lines are, and tell us probably not a good idea to dig up a mainline sewer. But all I was thinking was it would give us more opportunity. Plus, we could consider a couple of locations depending on price. My problem about deciding on a location and going to somebody and asking them, it makes me uneasy about there's no competition for what we'd be paying for a private piece of property. So that's what I was wondering, is if it's possible to put an expression of interest out so that we would have an idea of what was out there and what people were looking in a ballpark, what they're willing to sell for.
Mr. Howie?
Yes, it is possible. And we could put together something that said here's sort of a range of criteria around what that might look like, access, number of square meters, et cetera, and put an ad out. We could do that.
I can't even talk. Councillor Carlick-Pearson.
I think our topic is valid and everything, but I think we're jumping the gun here, and it's a little premature because, for one, we don't have no money to buy anything, let alone talk private properties, purchasing private properties. I think we got to go back to the meat and potatoes of what our meetings are for, and we need to find the money. We got to figure out if the community is going to support the project. We have to figure out if there's any other avenues to try and, get money for these projects. I would love to see the both buildings go up, in the ideal place, and to have new parks, et cetera. But that's unfortunately not the perfect. That is a perfect situation, but that's not where we're at right now. I think we got to get back and figure out, before planning everything out, 1-story, 2-story buildings and whatnot. We got to figure out what we're going to do with the money situation first, and then start planning the perfect building.
I see Mr. Gray has another question, so if you wanted to come forward, Mr. Gray.
I guess still putting the cart before the horse. Was Cow Bay area looked at all as a possible sites?
Mr. Roden?
Very briefly, that's on the foreshore, and we do live in a Class 5 seismic zone, and there is that chance of a tsunami or something like that showing up, and it's the question is why do you you're shaking your head, Mr. Gray, and I'm glad that you are, because I don't think it's likely, but I would hate to be around if it did happen. Similarly, like locating underneath the Mount Hayes, that which is an area which is prone, it can slide geotechnically, and it's why would you put a building in a place where there's a possible hazard that's completely you don't know if it's going to happen or not happen. It's very hard to quantify.
Mr. Gray?
Well, if we were going to use that for the criteria for building anything in Prince Rupert, we might as well all leave town. We had a tsunami here a number of years ago that because our harbor is protected, it's not one of the areas that even if there was a major, which there's been a number of the major earthquakes in the area, we have not had a tsunami of any consequence here at all. The properties that I was thinking of was there's a piece of property that BC Packers still owns, Weston, which is a large piece of property. Plus there's the old tank farm properties that are not at water level. They're off the foreshore. They're on the upper side of whatever they call it, George Hills Way, or not George Hills, Cow Bay Road. Anyway, Cow Bay Road. That are the city is looking at acquiring part of it for a hard road bed, and it would be a large enough location. It's still central, and anyway.
Well, certainly, I think we're open. As you can see, we're talking about hypotheticals and possibilities. So any suggestions are always welcome. And I think what staff is saying is that as we look at these different things, whether it's high risk, low risk, etc., they're all things that kind of enter the equation when we're making the decision. But certainly the suggestions are welcome, and we'll consider them. Thank you. I did have just a comment, unless somebody else has questions or comments. Okay. And it's regarding Councillor Carlick-Pearson, and I agree. I mean, in a sense, we're talking about a lot of things that are hypotheticals, and yeah, we're in a situation where we don't have money. But I think that what's important to remember, at least from my perspective, is that the reason that we're going through this process, why we've been having all these meetings, is to collect the information that we need to, that the public needs to decide whether or not this is something right now they think we can afford, so that they have because before we can go out and ask, at least and please, staff, if I'm incorrect, please correct me. But before we can go out and ask if the public wants us to spend money or borrow money, we have to have like a reasonable description of exactly how much money we have to borrow and what it's going to be for. And so while we've been given different scenarios that Mr. Abell's company has looked at and given us information, there may be other things as we discuss this that will come up. And I think that as Mr. Roden has said before, right now we're not really in that financial position. We might decide as a council that this might be something that we continue planning, and then we look for those sources of revenue. But I think it's important that we discuss these different possibilities, and as new things come up or are suggested, that we look at them, because then we'll have a full picture and we'll be making an informed decision. But I certainly agree with you in that, we have to be considering all of those different things. Does anyone else on council have any further questions? Because if not, I'm going to open it up to public questions. Okay, is there any member of the public that would like to come forward at this time and ask a question or make a suggestion or comment? And I know who you are, but if you could just please your name and let people know.
Well, I suppose I could probably do that. I'm Alan Hale. I'm a reporter with the Northern View newspaper here in town. I've just got a question for Inspector Kilberry and Chief Mackenzie. After seeing of what we've seen today, I would just like to know which of these options just meets the operational needs of your organization the best. Just what you guys need out of a piece of property, which one best suits them.
From my perspective, I like the Site 1 option, and no matter whatever configuration it comes into. It doesn't differ much from where we're located now. It's virtually just across the street. So when we talk about the lay of the land, the security aspects, the accessibility to the main arterial roads, accessibility for the public to our building, it meets all of the criteria that we're looking for.
I'd agree with the Site 1 option. Our only concern is pulling the apparatus out onto either McBride Street or using 5th Avenue, 6th Avenue for access points. We come up a hill, it's a blind hill when we come up off McBride Street, so we'd have to have some emergency traffic lights in or whatever to stop traffic that we can trigger like other communities have. Other than that, it fits the criteria quite well. Centrally located.
Go ahead.
Are there any of the properties that you would say hands down would not be suitable at all? I've heard there was some criticism of the Dairy Queen site, and I was wondering just if there are some things you just can't, that you just would have to veto if you could veto this sort of thing.
I don't think we could veto any of them. There's just certain criteria that's got to be met, and as I said earlier, for the Dairy Queen, for us, the apparatus, moving apparatus, becomes a problem. Trying to get it out to main corridor safely with the heavy traffic flow. The 2nd Avenue, 8th Street, that's not a bad site getting on the highway again. It's on a main road. We still may have to have emergency lights to stop the flow of traffic if needed, but I would say the 2nd Avenue, McBride Street one would probably be the worst one for us.
If I had to pick a worst out of that batch, I guess it would be the old Inlander site, just because of the concerns about underground parking that might be required, and the fact that you have a 16-story building beside you, and we're talking from our security people's perspective, they certainly would be, they don't like anything that's taller than we are. So when people can observe what's going on down below us, or could be throwing things over into the, easily to throw something over a fence from a higher perch and observe what's going on. So that would be less preferable.
Okay. Is there anyone else that would like to come forward and ask a question, make a comment, make a suggestion? Mr. Roden.
I have another person has phoned in, a Kathy Quain from 156 Raven Crescent, and she asked if we've considered the old BC Hydro site, and she explained she joined the program late, and yes, we have considered the site, and Mr. Horn can respond to your question.
Yeah, we considered the BC Hydro site some time ago, actually, and the first time we went around this, I'm trying to remember what year that was. Anyways, we did consider that one a long time ago. The site has got some issues, as I said before, with the muskeg servicing. It's a long way out of town for the operations of the fire department and for the RCMP. The other issue with that one, too, is also got poor access into town. If you've ever lost a bridge that comes in on the highway, then that kind of eliminates almost any way to get into town. And I'm pretty sure that if you had a fairly major earthquake, you'd lose the 2nd Avenue Bridge and the 6th Avenue East Bridge. And if you lost the one into town, you'd have nothing, no fire protection into town itself.
Are there any other questions from members of the public? Any further questions? Sorry, come on up.
Hi. My name's Karina, and yes, I'm a citizen here. I'm also a grandmother whose children do enjoy playing in that park, and I would hate to see it go. Whether or not you want to move, it's all the time and everything else like this. We are limited to parks in this community. I mean, right now you've got a ballpark over on Kootenay Avenue with a lot of low-income housing over there, lots of kids, and that park is awful. There's one thing about the community here is there's not a lot of nice parks for the kids to go. How many did you guys close? Anyways.
Is that a question that you
No, that's not a question. It's just a comment that I'm not for Site 1. However, I am for the 5-way corners. I think that's a worthwhile investment, and I'm kind of surprised that there wasn't more looking into that. And the reason why I'm suggesting that property to look into it further is that there's many opportunities we have location-wise for the port, and we can also partner up with them, with Mar Terminal, the Port Authority, the ferries, CN, see if they would contribute some money to purchase and also building these facilities, because they actually use these. our services from the fire department. If there was a fire down at the waterfront, who are they going to call? Being realistic. And also just contributing a win-win there. I think that's the most ideal property, and I think that City Council should, and I hope you do look into that property.
Thank you. Always looking for suggestions, and it's always good to hear from what people are thinking. Councillor Garon.
Thank you, Your Worship. Question for staff. Have we looked into any of the properties in the Yellowhead Centre?
No, we haven't.
And for Inspector Kilberry, would that be too far out of town, or what's your comment?
I'm going to ask in a sec.
It would be less than ideal for us. I think it's not as accessible to everybody in town, not centrally located. I think bus service, on the weekends, we still, although our front desk is not open, we still have people come to our front door and that we have to deal with. And so to make things accessible to everybody in the community, it's far better if it's centrally located.
Just Councillor Garon or staff, or I've heard it, but I'm not exactly sure where the Yellowhead Centre part is. So I'm just thinking if other people are like me, they might like an explanation if somebody could.
It's the industrial park off the highway, accessed from Prince George and Saskatoon, and it's between Prince Rupert Boulevard and the highway.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments from the public and or from council? Mr. Roden.
I have another question from Brian Robinson of 1025 9th East, and he's wondering whether or not the space beside the old Elizabethan Park, the old Elizabeth apartment site and the small apartment building near the Ocean View, has it been considered? And no, it has not. It's I don't know whether or not the highest or best use of that site would be an RCMP station or a fire department.
There are also some very difficult grades and elevations along there. The old Elizabeth site is not all that deep, and then as you get closer to the Ocean View, it's probably a deeper pit than the property next to the Highliner.
Are there any other questions from the public and or from council? Okay, seeing none, is there anything further from staff?
No, Your Worship.
Okay, well, seeing no further questions or comments, I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Kinney, seconded by Councillor Carlick-Pearson. Any discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor? That motion is carried. This meeting is adjourned. There we go.